I mean, when the Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz developed LSD in 1943, like they were having to solve the big question, what is it good for? Like
Yeah.
Albert Hoffman, the chemist, he found it basically involuntarily, and he reported to the CEO, I had very strong reactions basically in the brain. So they set up an intoxication room. I found the documents about this intoxication room in the Novartis archive when I researched Tripped, because Novartis bought Sandoz in the 90s. So all the LSD stuff is in the Novartis archive. And this intoxication room, I always think it's kind of interesting to imagine. This was 1943. There's a world war going on everywhere in Europe except in Switzerland, which is a neutral country. But Basel, where the LSD was found, is like a stone throw from the German border. So you actually hear the war going on. And so they created a nice room within the company, and then all the employees voluntarily could go and take LSD. So they were the first people to take LSD, and they had no idea that there was at one point, MK Ultra, and they were just trying out something that one of their guys had developed. And I read through all these reports, and they all had a great experience. They was like sitting in a nice chair, and they looked outside the window, and they were like reporting stuff like, I just had to laugh the whole time. I felt so good. I realized about my life, or it kind of created in them the feeling like a heightened sensitivity, and a feeling of that this is how life should feel, kind of. So the CEO, Arthur Stoll, he was really trying to figure out what he could market it for, because he thought maybe this is a game changer in mental health, because this was before antidepressants, before antipsychotics, and it was in the middle of World War II, which had created already millions of traumatized people. How do you treat these people? So they thought LSD could be really a big thing. And I mean, I just told you when I first took LSD, and I somehow was interested in LSD, but I never thought I would write a book about it. I just used it once in a while when I wanted to understand something about my life, or just enjoy a day in the ocean. But I read a study that microdoses of LSD at one point help against Alzheimer, and my mother has Alzheimer's. So I discussed this with my father, who takes care of my mother. And this was an academic study. I discussed this also with a leading Alzheimer expert that I interviewed for Tripped, and he's like, wow, this is amazing. Like, because LSD interacts with the very same receptors, the 5-HT2A receptors in the brain, that LSD interacts with those receptors, and Alzheimer destroys those receptors. So LSD basically does the opposite that Alzheimer does. And I discussed this with my father, and he said, so why can't I buy LSD in the pharmacy if it's so good, He was a judge before. He actually put people in prison for drugs. So he said, you better bring me the story. So I did kind of a research loop. This is the book Tripped.
Yeah.
Then I came back to him in the end with the true story of why LSD has been made illegal. And that is quite fascinating, because the Swiss CEO, Stoll, he had learned biochemistry. This is very nerdy, but I think it's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He had learned biochemistry from the Jewish-German god of biochemistry, Wildstetter. Richard Wildstetter was Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, and his work was, he would extract the potent alkaloids from so-called poisonous plants and make, the poison. Paracelsus taught us it's the dosage that makes the poison. If you take too much of a potent alkaloid, maybe it's a poison. But if you extract a potent alkaloid, maybe you can turn it into a medicine. So Stoll learned this from Wildstetter, and there was another guy that was learning from Wildstetter, Richard Kuhn. So it was Kuhn and Stoll. Those were the two students of Wildstetter, and Stoll left and became the CEO of Sandoz and developed the pharmaceutical branch of Sandoz, and Kuhn became Hitler's leading biochemist and was responsible in finding a truth drug and also developing nerve gas. So, but the two guys, Kuhn and Stoll, stayed friends also when the Nazis took power. Like I researched the papers of Stoll in the archive, and in the 1920s he would communicate all the ergot research. LSD is an ergot product. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye. He would communicate all this with Kuhn, and Kuhn would come to the Sandoz lab, and they did experiments together. And then in 1943, Kuhn was, a hardcore Nazi scientist, and especially looking for the truth drug at the time. And I was looking through the archive. I wanted to find the connection that, Stoll also sent LSD to Kuhn, because when I was researching for Blitzed in Dachau, I had found that the SS had done in the concentration camp of Dachau experiments with mescaline and another hallucinogenic substance which was not named. And mescaline has the problem. The truth drug idea is I give you something without you noticing it, like something that doesn't smell or doesn't taste like anything. And then after like half an hour, I know that something's working in your brain, and you become insecure because suddenly something's working in your brain, and I can play with that situation and therefore extract all the secrets from you because it's a power. I'm suddenly above you because I know something about you that you don't know. That was the idea. The problem with mescaline was it has a bitter taste, and it's kind of hard to make it. And LSD is very easy to make. Not very easy, but it's quite easy. And LSD is odorless and tasteless. So I was trying to, I somehow had the notion that LSD has a Nazi past, which is something that no one ever thinks about. LSD is like the hippie drug, right? It's a drug of the peace people. But I wanted to see all the papers of the CEO of Stoll, and the archivist. He already knew, like he was the Swiss archivist, and this is not a public archive. In a public archive, you basically, like a National Archive of the United States, you see what's there, you have the right to see it, freedom of information. But a company archive like Novartis archive, the archivist can just say no. I can't find this right. You basically at his mercy. So I bribed him with LSD. Because he didn't want to show me. He didn't want to show me the Stoll papers. And I said to him, just to distract him, I said, have you ever seen LSD? And he's like, no. Well, how would I see it? And I said, well, I have some here. And I had some. I just had gotten it from a friend.
What does LSD look like? Tabs?
Yeah, tab. I had a paper. And the funny thing about... Yeah, there's a different designs.
Oh, and you could put it on your tongue? Is that
right,
how people usually take it?
Yeah, then you take it like that. And the one I had was given to me by a Swiss friend, and it had, like, here you see certain prints on it.
Oh, yeah.
And he had the print was the old logo of Sandoz from the 40s. So the guys who make this illegal LSD in Basel in some kind of lab, they know where it comes from. So they made like a joke to make like the old logo of Sandoz. So I showed this to the archivist. He said, this has the old logo of our company. I said, well, it was made by your company. He said, I know this, but it's not. This is very interesting, actually. And I said, I'm gonna gift you one of these trips now. And he said, wow, you would do this? And I said, you can archive it. And he's like, ha, ha, ha. And then he actually took one. Then the ice broke.
That's great.
And then he said, okay, I'm going to show you now the correspondence of Stoll, our CEO. It's no problem. And he just went to the next room and he looked for like 10 minutes. And then he brought me these boxes. And then I saw actually the correspondence between Stoll and Kuhn, between the Swiss CEO and the German Nazi scientist, what they were talking about. And then I found a smoking gun. October 1943, Kuhn acknowledges that he receives 0.5 gram of ergotamine, which is the precursor drug to LSD, and so it's highly likely that the Nazis used LSD together with mescaline in Dachau. And when the Americans liberated the Dachau camp, they had a special unit called ALSOS with them, and ALSOS' job was to find German scientists and kind of interview them, get their knowledge for the nuclear program mostly, but also for biochemical weapons. And one of the first persons they interrogated was Richard Kuhn. And Richard Kuhn immediately collaborated because he didn't want to go to the Nuremberg trial. He wanted to continue his career, actually. He was an opportunist. So I guess his Nazi convictions were not so strong after all, because he also liked the Americans. So he told the Americans immediately about LSD, and the next day, a very high general flew from the States to Frankfurt, went to Heidelberg, spoke to Kuhn again, took off his uniform, and went in civil clothing to Basel, because Switzerland is neutral, and received the first LSD from Stolz Sang. So the American general had LSD. This was in 1945 in the summer. And then the American military started to examine LSD. Could LSD be the true drug? Because if the Nazis think so, maybe it's true, because the Nazis were, cutting edge scientists, as evil as they were.
In Dachau, this was presumably used for the different experimentation that was done.
Well, I read one report from a guy who was an inmate, and he received it in coffee, and he had a full-blown psychedelic trip. And he had this SS guy who was like asking him questions, and the guy had such a great trip.
Yeah.
I would always imagine you have a terrible trip in a concentration camp, and he was like seeing fractals and colors, and he could see that there was something bigger than these Nazis, and there was something bigger than the concentration camp. And he only said it was so horrible when the trip ended, and he kind of became sober again and was just an inmate again in the concentration camp.
I mean, one of the things you get from books like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is that in the concentration camp, actually, the slightest good things are so rich of feeling. You just get, so like I would actually expect to have incredible trips there, because you're just grateful for anything positive. Anything positive.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Becomes intensified. But
Makes
from the
sense.
perspective of the Nazis, they're trying to develop the truth drug.
They miserably failed.